Einen wunderschönen guten Abend. Es ist Dienstag, der 6. April und Sie hören, dass es 19 Uhr ist in Deutschland und wir haben es etwas früher in den Vereinigten Staaten, wo meine Kollegen mit unserer charmanten Special Guest heute, Laurie McCabe von der SMB Group bei uns ist und die uns heute ihre Einblicke auf die diversen Perspektiven und Veränderungen speziell im SMB-Markt, also was bei uns KMU entsprechend informieren wird. I'm very happy to have Laurie McCabe as our special guest today. And together with my two colleagues, Marshall Lager and Thomas Wiebernight, who is now in a different location, like you used to see him normally from Seattle. He is now live from Oregon. So we have a bit change of the surroundings and the setups, and we hope you like it. Now, Laurie, fantastic that we could win you again to go into detail for what's happening with the SMB market. And for our audience, I would be most happy if you do a self-introduction about yourself and the SMB group, please. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks, guys, for having me again. Laurie McCabe, and I'm one of the two co-founders of SMB Group. And both myself and Sanjeev Agarwal, who co-founded SMB Group with me about 10 years ago, we've both been analysts in the industry, in the tech industry, for a long time. But we decided, for various reasons, most notably, we got laid off from the company we were working for after the Great Recession hit. So we started our own company back then, and thankfully, gratefully, we've been going pretty strong ever since. And as the name SMB Group implies, we focus on small and medium businesses and looking at all their issues, attitudes, requirements, concerns, challenges, everything that have to do with using technology in their business. So that's kind of our perspective and where we come from.
Cool. Would you say that the real challenge is small, medium business instead of large, big enterprise?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
Would you say that it is more tricky to run a small, medium business instead towards an enterprise where you have a lot of more of perspectives, money, and influences which are opening you the doors? Just go for tax legislation, which is easier for enterprises instead of small businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, there's always outliers each way, right? But in general, you're right. The smaller the company, the less time, money, people, expertise they have. So it's usually more challenging, especially with technology, which requires today not just technical expertise, but the business process expertise to apply it. You know, smaller companies, if you don't have that, it can be very frustrating and challenging, definitely.
Would you also say that it is more fun to drive a small, medium business like your own?
Absolutely. I mean, I've worked for big companies, medium companies, and small companies. And I have to say that I work for another small company in addition to the one we run, SMB Group. And I really think small companies are more fun, especially if you have, a lot of say in them. And, I know there's a lot. I just read something about there's been an historic level of startups since the recession hit, which is maybe a little counterintuitive for some people. But these startups include everybody from, people maybe they lost their job and they're, driving Uber for their own kind of, full-time thing while they figure out what to do next, to people starting up kind of a side job, to people launching their dream that they've had for a small business. And I think that what I would say, because I'm sure there's a lot of people right now considering starting a business. Speaking from personal experience, I think starting in the downturn is the best time to start, because you're at a point where you can kind of see, all right, this is how things are changing. These are how people's needs are different. And I'm just going to, maybe you don't have an idea for an entirely unique business, but you probably have some good ideas of how to do things differently and hopefully better. And so I think it's a great time to start.
I especially like what you say about it being more fun at the smaller end. I've worked for small companies. I've worked for big companies. I've tried to start my own. And when you're at some point when you are coming on to a large business, no matter how innovative it is, it's just a job unless you're at the top. When you're getting involved with something where you've got to have more than one job and you can really affect where things go,
right.
It's so much more exciting.
Yep.
And there's more risk involved, but
there is more risk.
They go together.
Right. And I think one of the, there's a lot of things to keep in mind when you do start up a business. And I know that's not the entire focus of this thing, but one of the things, it's a lot easier to start a new business in a field that you have experience and connections and relationships with. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Not that you can't do it the other way, but it's harder if you're starting totally from ground zero, I'm sure.
No doubt.
Looking at the digitalization of businesses, what do you think about maturity of SMBs versus enterprises with regards to digital maturity?
We do a lot of survey work, and we look at so just how we define small businesses. So for us, small is small. There's small businesses, as you guys know, very, very, very diverse, right? There's it's a label we put on things because it's easy, but it's certainly not a label that means everybody. And it's not like vanilla ice cream. Vanilla ice cream is pretty much vanilla ice cream. I'm probably going to have people yelling at me. I know there's differences in quality, but
some ice cream makers
so much variation. So for us, small at SMB Group, when we do surveys, is 1 to 99 employees. Medium is 100 to 909 employees. And then we have a segment we survey as well called mid-market, which is kind of that gray area between medium and being a really large enterprise. And that goes from 1,000 to 2,500. Now, I don't want to bore you with details, but within that, we also segment very finely for our clients, like the 1-person business, the 2 to 4-person business, 5 to 9. And while size isn't a proxy all the time for everything, the digital maturity really does correlate a lot with size. And I think it gets back, Ralph, to what you were saying before, that the smaller companies just don't have the time, money, expertise, etc., to do a lot of the things that, even a medium company would be able to do. And the interesting thing we see in our research is so many, even at the low end, they see it's important. They see that things are changing and they need to use technology more effectively, but they just have more roadblocks.
Yeah. Just an interesting aspect. What do you think on IT platforms as a foundation of enterprise resilience?
Well,
is that a good thing?
I think you have to really kind of think about it a little more big picture, right?
Okay.
What I think is that businesses have to always be kind of taking stock, listening to their stakeholders, customers, partners, suppliers, everybody that they in their ecosystem that they depend on to run their business, and constantly kind of be taking the pulse of how things may be moving so they can be in the right place at the right time with the right things. Now, can a platform enable that? Yes. A technology platform can certainly enable you to do that more effectively with better insights, connect the dots more easily, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also something culturally important and personality important. You know, some companies are very open to input and change, and they really want to embrace that. But other companies just kind of, hey, you know, we've always done it this way. It's been working. Why should we change? And it's just a cultural thing. So platforms are enablers, but you need the right kind of culture and leadership, I think, to take advantage of them.
Yeah, we make a note on this because we were lately discussing that topic, how if it is not a stoic, stupid, patriarchic-driven entrepreneur who is whipping his slaves, but is open-minded and taking things forward and sees the perspective that he can get easier through crisis or challenges if he has a stable environment and he can focus on his customers, his suppliers, his human beings instead of technology, because that is trustworthy running. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, this we just recently wrapped up a survey. We'll be publishing an ebook soon about some of the results, but it's called Technology Directions for Business and Technology Directions for SMBs. And you know, one of the things we see is that the SMBs that are really adapting their businesses and their technology practices and processes and moving ahead with some initiatives around digital transformation, number one, they're really performing better. They performed better in 2020 than their peers that kind of sat back, and their expectations for the year ahead are much better. They're also really interestingly so much more likely, I can't remember the exact thing, but 3 or 4 times more likely to be cloud first. So in other words, to say, hey, yeah, the next application I deploy will almost definitely be a cloud application. And I think what that gets to is what you're talking about, that you want to use the technology to implement the changes you need to make in the business. Yeah. And the cloud lets you do it a lot easier. Because if you know, so it's kind of like you need both things. You need to have a pulse on what's going on and listen well. And sometimes a platform helps you do that better too, by the way. And then you need to have a way to execute, and to execute at any scale. And you know, I mean, even a business, maybe a $2 or $3 million business this day, you're going to get really bogged down in the weeds if you can't automate a lot of that.
True. Just one thing I want to go back to.
Who's Big Baby Burke? Hey, baby, I gave you a shout out there.
Well, hello there. Whoever.
Yeah, hello there. And you are the first commenter from Twitch. Great.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
That's cool. Also the statement, you tell them, Laurie. Okay. We're listening, man. We're listening, lady.
we were just talking before we went live how all analysts have to be pretty much big mouth. So
Well, she's good. I just wanted to go back briefly, and it doesn't even have to be a topic we dwell on. I just wanted to point out one thing that I've always admired about SMB Group is that you focus on the size of businesses based on how many people are there. You also consider, you know, their revenue, their market cap, whatever, but it's a very, very different kind of size when you look at a business that has 5 to 9 people versus, you know, 10 to 20 or, you know, those various ranges. Those are real qualitative differences that are expressed as quantities. Whether you're making $500,000 a year or $5 million a year, that's just a number. You can write a check for any amount, but that you cover those differences in actual business size, the size of the business, the number of people that have to use the technology and make the work happen, I think that's great. I don't think that enough analysts do that enough.
Well, thanks, Marshall. I mean, we do look at both. That's just one thing we look at. We definitely also track their revenues, and but in general, as not that there's not fabulously wealthy one man or woman shows out there. There
Exactly,
are.
yeah.
But in general, as you grow and you hire employees, your revenues hopefully are growing, but also all the complexities of the organization, right? So whether it's HR complexities or customer relationship complexities or financial complexities, regulatory complexities, all those things change. And so many things, I don't know what it's like in Germany, guys, but here in the US, so many regulations are based on employee size and kick in terms of mandates of things you need to do in your business, from health insurance to everything.
Formalism can kill human, let's say, intelligence, can kill entrepreneur spirit, and make or sometimes has the stopping power of a 365 Magnum, such as boom, and everything what you thought might come forward is stopped. GDPR is just one example. Tax legislation, or the Brexit, which happened to a lot of companies here, was not at a sudden, because the Brits took their time to make it a long-lasting exit. But when the day came at a sudden, like Christmas, what you do, and how are you prepared, and how do you recover? Right. So if you simply look at, if you export products to Great Britain, or you are a supplier for one of the last car makers, Vauxhall, in Great Britain, and you want to export a car, the car has go back and forth to get some of the parts. This is now 10 times of paperwork you had before. It's absolutely crazy. Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a great example. We, my significant other, Jeff, and I took our bikes in to be tuned up, right, in the spring, so we can get out there and ride them again. And not motorcycles, just, bicycles. And it was a local bike store about 15, 20 minutes from where we are.
Yeah.
Who was just bought by Trek, right? So Trek is a pretty big, I don't know if you've heard of Trek, but they're a very big bike brand here.
Okay.
And so we're talking to the tech who was checking out our bikes and telling us the damage that we were going to need to get these things ready to roll. And we were asking about, well, how do you like the change here? He said, well, it's still like a great crew. We still have like a lot of the same techs. So that's all good. But Trek has everything automated. So we're able to service the customer so much better. We can, everything from, inspections, the way they do them of the bikes, and writing up what needs to be done and getting it into the system and giving you a time when your bike is going to be delivered. It's all automated now. The call to you once the bike is ready. In the past, it was all literal, and I remember because I was there last year before they were acquired, it was all on a pad. They'd write out what was wrong, they'd give you a slip. And he said, so customers are a lot happier now because nothing's falling, or very little is falling through the cracks now, because the system, like you said before, the platform, whatever they use, I should have asked, keeps everybody on track, and everybody in the shop is on the same page. And when they also know, in terms of managing their inventory and supplies and things like that. He said we hardly ever run out of anything anymore, that we need to service the bikes because everything is automated to let us know when things get to a certain point.
Would you see them as front runners, or are they, just in quotes, a good example of how companies reacted through?
Yeah, no, I think in that case, it was really a small, locally owned. They had about, I think, 3 locations, but family business was bought by Trek, which is probably a mid-market type of company. I don't think it's probably large enterprise. And I think Trek, probably already had these systems. They already owned shops. And so for them, it was a question of rolling this stuff out. But it certainly was very interesting to hear this tech basically tell us how his life is better because of this. And he thinks the customers are probably a lot happier.
Yeah. Rephrasing the question, so the past year was kind of a roller coaster ride for not only for us, but for consumers, for businesses, basically for everyone. So now, do you have any indications or data on how businesses reacted to that?
Oh yeah, we have a lot of data on that.
I guess so. I hope so.
So that was a good leading question there, Thomas. So no, we since COVID hit, we've done 3 surveys. So the first one was literally right the deer in the headlights moment in March of 2020. And everyone was kind of shell-shocked, and really uncertainty. If there's one word to sum up how everybody was thinking and behaving, it was they felt uncertain and they didn't know how to react to the uncertainty. So that was like right in that initial phase, and they were all caught off guard, and everybody was totally not everybody. There was about 15% of them back then that still felt their businesses would really thrive and kind of do very well despite this. And we can probably think about what industries that might have made a lot of sense in, like personal protection gear and all those, and different kinds of medical equipment. But by July, we saw things shifting again. And we saw that a lot of the SMBs by that point had said, all right, we really need to reinvent our businesses now, right? Not all of them, but, more of them. And they were turning to their customers, their partners, their employees, everybody to kind of get input and take a pulse. And so by July, a lot of them had done and made many changes to their businesses. The obvious ones that we all know are all the meetings obviously became virtual. Anybody that could work at home started to work at home, started to better equip, in a lot of cases, employees to work at home more productively. Another the change they made, though, externally with the customers that I think was just super successful for most of them was turning a lot of the physical world services into virtual services. So we can all think about, I know the YMCA I go to, a lot of the classes went online, or, telemedicine, things like that. But even a lot of companies, there's a company, I think it's in the UK, and she has a big goat farm. And she raises all these goats, and people come and see the goats, and she makes all these cheeses and different cool things that people buy. And so she started renting the goats out for online meetings as like icebreakers and things like that. And she just kind of did it as a lark, but it really took off. And, they could rent the goat, they pick out the goat that they like. I'm sure if you Google this, you can find it. And Also, the other big change that a lot of businesses made. So one was offering virtual services. Another, I think I mentioned it last time, this beekeeper company in the Washington area decided all the things that people came to see live and learn, and the classes they learned about beekeeping, they started doing all that virtually. And of course, the other big shift was to e-commerce. So we just really saw like a tremendous number of businesses that have been primarily brick and mortar. They maybe had some kind of crappy website, e-commerce site, just really say, hey, I've got to start selling online because I'm not going to get the foot traffic that I usually rely on. So people really, those were, I think, the biggest ones, all the changes to enable remote work, trying to create virtual services for your customers so that you could still engage and interact with them and have the relationship, but not in a physical location. And then the e-commerce. Those were the three big ones.
In how far did the e-commerce or the e-commerce challenges that these businesses then had go into the supply chain? Because
supply chain was an issue and still is an issue. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what's going on in the construction industry here, but the price of lumber, I think it's like gone up, I don't know, 40%, 50%.
What?
Really?
Yes. So new home building, home improvement, all these things.
Okay.
Like you can just slap on, and depending on the project, another 5K or 40K or whatever, because and lumber isn't the only thing, but that's really a significant one. And the interesting thing is here in the U.S. that has not slowed demand for these projects. Our real estate market is going through an enormous boom, and I was reading one thing, they got 76 cash offers within like 24 hours for a house, and everybody was outbidding everybody else. So it is a case of supply chain. Whether at a certain point, I think it is going to have an inflationary effect. But right now, people are willing to spend the money.
Mm-hmm. So you would say that the smaller homes market went up, the do-it-yourself market rocketed sky high, and lumber was one of the winners of COVID-19.
Well, I don't necessarily can say as a winner. I mean, I don't know what the profit margin is. So, I mean, I'm going to assume it helped their profit margin, but it's definitely a case that they weren't ready for the demand. What happened here is that a lot of people, they were home and they needed separate areas for the kids or the home office or whatever that they needed to get a contractor to put in. It's not necessarily do it yourself. Big demand for that. And then a very big demand for people living in the city to want to get a place more remote because, I live in a pretty rural suburban kind of area, and I can go out and take a walk in the woods anytime I want, be all by myself, not have to worry about, with the dog, not have to worry about social distancing. And I know Sanjeev, my colleague, is in the Back Bay in Boston in a beautiful townhouse, 2-bedroom townhouse, but it was claustrophobic. So they actually ended up buying a house on the Cape so they could be outside, at Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And that's another big trend. So, it's not like things are black and white, but there's all kinds of intertwining things going on that affect everything. And I remember when this first happened, and I have a very good friend who bought a house here in my neighborhood that was a steal. It was like $100,000 off of the list. She got it for back in March of 2020. Now that house, she could easily sell it for $200,000 more. So it's been a crazy roller coaster ride.
And what was the survey you undertook recently and you're gonna publish between end of April and probably May? What were the topics you were looking for to evaluate and analyze?
Yeah, well, in this study, we're really, the first two studies had a big COVID component, right?
Yeah.
This study, we can't ignore COVID, but, as COVID at least starts to recede a little bit from being the dominant, part of everybody's life, we're looking more at their business and technology directions going forward.
Yeah.
And, one of the things we found is that, first of all, a lot of businesses in July, a higher percentages of businesses in July were pessimistic about how their overall business performance for 2020. But when we surveyed them again in February, we had a higher percentage being optimistic. So actually I think it was like 54% of all the SMBs we surveyed and mid-market companies were optimistic about their revenues and their business performance for 2021. So, and a lot of them ended up coming out fairly whole in 2020 too. I think it was like 44%, or more. I can't remember the exact numbers, but you have to wait for the ebook. But a good, healthy percentage of them beat or met their revenue from 2019 and 2020. And when we asked a lot of that in the middle of 2020, a lot fewer thought they would be able to do that. But a lot of them recovered, and so we think the story of this year is a big rebound. And you can see that all over in a lot of economic things that are going on. The only real exception to that is certain industries that were just really pummeled, like restaurant and hospitality, different travel things, and the very small businesses. So businesses with less than 10 employees, it's a pretty big gap in terms of optimism. They are not as optimistic as the ones that, even as you get up to more than 10, the optimism level starts looking a whole lot brighter. But definitely overall, we're definitely having a pretty bullish feeling in SMB land.
What do you attribute that to, except for vaccinations?
Well, I think there's the vaccinations, are really going very well here now that we have a new president. They're really going at a tremendous clip. I hear we did like 4 million in one day yesterday or something like that. And the business environment, I think people made adjustments, made changes, and a lot of them did well with those changes, right? They actually were able to recover in 2020 to revenue levels they had in 2019, and a lot of them beat those revenue levels. So demand in a lot of areas is really picked up. So I think it's for good reason. I don't think it's just cockeyed optimism. I think people are getting the business and seeing the demand and seeing the changes they're making work.
Did they also see a dip that was as bad as they expected it to be earlier last year?
I would say that the percentage of SMBs who took a negative revenue hit in 2020 versus 2019 was less than they would have predicted. In other words, when we surveyed them middle of 2020, a lot more negativity about how their results were going to turn out for 2020 than when we surveyed them after 2020 was all over and they had their actual performance numbers. They were better. So, yeah. And, I anecdotally, I've talked to so many small and medium businesses where that's exactly what happened. They were in that immediate panic mode. The sky was falling, and then they started kind of taking a step back, figuring out how can I, it's an overused term, but how can I pivot? How can I adjust? How can I maybe capitalize on some of this? And, that resiliency and ingenuity kicked in. Not for everyone, but for a good, healthy percentage. Absolutely. I mean, I know, speaking of ourselves, we changed things last year.
Yeah. So all in all, you found out that some were prepared to do a certain survival technique and had, let's say, foreseen that it is needed not only to digitalize and to transform with certain processes and approaches, but they were to a certain degree prepared to adopt easier than others.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think people that had a decent technology foundation in place probably found it easier to adapt and change.
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of companies I've spoken with, the pandemic kind of made them accelerate change. I was talking to a HubSpot customer who, I forget what components they were using a HubSpot, but for like 2 years, they were like, should we also do this, And they kept putting it off. And he said, once the pandemic hit, it was just like, all right, we've got to do this now, because if we don't do it now, we're going to be sunk. And I was talking to a manufacturer with ERP that, same thing. They were kind of dragging their feet, and this all hit. And I said, did you have because this was the, like an operations guy. I said, did you have a hard time, convincing the execs? He goes, no. He said, we had a hard time convincing them for like years. But when this hit, it was like, yeah, it's kind of do or die. If we don't do this better, manufacturing, logistics, and operations, we're going to be hung out to dry.
Now that the levee has broken, now that has happened and changes have been made, a lot of them in response to an emergency situation, how much of that are we going to keep once the crisis is passed? Have we really changed our work style? Or is it, well, I'm glad we don't have to use these cars anymore, so we can get back to using horses?
Well, I mean, I think we can even see from, the big companies how different things are, right? Like Microsoft, it looks like they're kind of on a trajectory to get a lot of people back in the office. Whereas like Dropbox, they're proclaimed virtual first. And I think these companies in the large end are all over the board on this. And I think it's the same in SMB in terms of work from home. But I think having the capacity to work anywhere, anytime, if you have to, I think that was a lesson everybody learned. And I just think everybody realizes we have to have that flexibility and have that agility. In terms of the customer-centric changes, those aren't going anywhere because the customers like them, right? That doesn't mean they don't want to go back into a physical store ever. But again, they want the choice, right? If I want to go to the B place, which I know there's a better name than B place for this, but if I want to go there and take the classes hands-on and, get the big B suit on and all that kind of stuff to learn how to do this, I want to do that. But if I want to do it online, I want to learn about it online, I want to do that. Same thing with physical products. Same thing with contactless payments.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to touch anything with COVID. I don't think any of us really want to start touching everything again. Do we? If
Maybe
you can
not.
just,
I could use a hug, but
yeah, right. But with your credit card, if you could just tap and go, why not? Is that going to go away? No, it's not going to go away. So I think all of the things that we've seen, you know, are going to be around, and I'm sure there's people cooking up a whole lot more great ideas.
So you would agree that we will have a different approach of working, such as simply work differently in a way, when we do something like we could call a restart, because I know that my friend Marshall doesn't like the word which is usually taken for that restart thing, and I prefer to rethink
Which
and
is it?
rephrase and utilize, as I do not use the term, for instance, homeschooling for my kids, because this has something in my mindset that we are no longer are properly educated by teachers, but that mom and dads are taking teaching in their own hands, which is more or less a disaster area, depending on how smart mom and dad are. Yeah. And I prefer properly educated teachers to teach my kids, or professors in university, as they are a little bit older now. Now, taking that forward, the perspective is, where are we going within the next 3 months? What do you foresee by your studies? Where are trends? And let's say, take a step back. You did some research, you published in January, it had found 10 trends. Which of them came to a certain, let's say, realism already? And where would you say, it might take some more time, such as time is the aspect, you will leave us a little bit earlier than expected, and we just want to pre-warn our audience that around about 8 to 9 minutes, you are on the move. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Well, I think I mentioned some of the changes that are here to stay, right?
Okay.
The more flexible, accommodating more flexible work styles and more flexible workplaces.
Yeah.
I think what we are also going to see in regard to that is people, you know, we need you to work at home. And I think initially, a lot of companies probably need jerk to, okay, I guess we'll go hybrid, right? We'll offer people a choice, or we'll give them a choice of whatever. Now, we definitely see from our research that the next thing that companies are starting to think about is making this a more strategic decision about what their new workplace will look like. So that doesn't just get into how many days you work in the office versus how many days you work at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
It gets to, well, really, what kind of work is best done on site?
Yeah.
What activities do people, you know, are they better off physically together to collaborate? And then designing both the workspaces, commercial workspaces, to accommodate that better, because maybe you had a bunch of cubes for like all these employees that came in there every day. But now that's not going to happen. So how are you going to redesign that workplace so the team meetings are more effective? You have more than just a meeting room. You have something maybe that's better, you know, better ambiance for collaboration. And then the people that are kind of popping in and out. And then also, what really do our people at home need? And taking into account everything from time zone differences to burnout issues to all kinds of things that will be important in thinking through and designing something that will be a work in progress for a long time. But how are we going to evolve this workplace and workforce concept? So that's, you know, one thing. But the other things I mentioned, the virtual services, contactless or low touch payments and other kinds of transactions, those, we don't see any signs of these things going away. If anything, you know, e-commerce, none of it, if anything, it's just accelerating. One of the really big areas that we think is on the horizon. So a lot of people did a lot to accommodate better collaboration between employees, right? So one of the things that they're really looking towards is, how do I achieve better collaboration with the external parties I have to work with all the time, customers, partners, suppliers. So that I think is kind of on the horizon. We know they invested from our studies a lot in solutions and changing practices to do a better job engaging customers, and servicing them. Matter of fact, customer service is the #1 area that all SMBs of all, the overall, like maybe it wouldn't be exactly the same for one size segment versus another, but customer service is the top automation priority overall in the SMB market. So that is something we know there a lot of companies will be looking at and figuring out, how do I really do this well? Because some of them learn the hard way that if they can't provide good customer service, it's the death knell.
Is sales and marketing taking a bit step forward with it, automation, influence, and progress?
I'm sorry, is what kind of marketing?
Sales and marketing.
Sales and marketing. Yeah, well, they're kind of, like, we can all always do better with sales and marketing, but it's like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So in most businesses, the first thing you take care of when you start buying real business applications is probably an accounting application. You got to keep track somehow of money in and money out.
Yeah.
But the next thing you're probably buying is sales and marketing stuff. Because you really have to get those customers and keep getting new customers and all that kind of thing. So in the hierarchy of needs, customer service usually comes a little later, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because in a lot of ways, if you don't have good customer service, you're going to not do a good job of, getting your customers back. But in most small and medium businesses, they don't attack that until they've kind of gone through the first two, the sales and marketing, and then, further down the line, they're getting into, internal IT operations and all kinds of things. But it's not a one size fits all, but there is kind of a hierarchy of needs, and keeping track of money going in and money going out, getting new customers are usually, for most, especially on the small end, hey, it's kind of like, I need air and I need water. And that's where those are. I do think, though, that, there's a big opportunity for sales and marketing for a lot of small and medium businesses to use them better and more effectively, and use better solutions and more solutions really aligned to what they do. I talked to a really interesting vendor today called Affinity. I'm going to be doing a blog on them. They do relationship intelligence. You may want to bring these guys on. They're very interesting. And the CRM is all designed for kind of high relationship businesses, complex relationships. So whether that's financial services or consulting or commercial real estate, where you really need to do a good job, they've got kind of a really cool way of making that a lot easier to do. So I in a long-winded way of saying, what you used 2 years ago or 5 years ago, may not still be the best thing, but it's probably pretty likely they're using sales and marketing.
For me, trailing one. So everybody's talking about confusing words like digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation, which are rolling hard on my tongue. What do you think is it what businesses are doing? Briefly.
What do I think they're doing? And what,
whether they are doing digitalization,
well,
or whether they are
I think
undergoing a transformation.
I mean, it's like parsing something too much for a lot of businesses, right? I mean, we ask them, are you using digital technologies to either change your entire business model or reinvent your business practices and processes? If they're doing one or both of those, we think they're digitally transforming. If they're just using software to do what they do today the exact same way, but just have it not be manual, then I don't really think that's digital transformation. But automation is very important. It's the first step, right? I mean, if you're not automating something already, it's a much bigger leap. But we find a lot of companies, when they say, oh yeah, now we're going to use, we're going to get a customer service software solution in, that's when they look at their business practices in that area and they say, gee, look at what we do. It's so kind of convoluted, the solution would have us go through this whole other flow, and maybe they know better than we do because they're the experts. So it's, it's a lot of parsing, but it's a mix. It's a mix. But there are a lot that obviously when you go to virtual services, you're changing a business practice. And you're changing the way you do it, because you certainly can't do a virtual service the way you did a physical world service. Or you're
being mindful of your time. Sorry, Laurie.
Yeah, well, I've had so much fun with you guys. So
same here, and we probably could continue for quite some time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to see you, and I will certainly send you the link to the ebook on the latest study in a couple of weeks.
Great.
Yes, please.
All right, thanks, guys.
We will
highly interested in reading it ourselves.
Figures. Trust us. We will chase you on some figures. Trust
Absolutely, absolutely. I will try to get those to you.
Oh, okay.
All right, thank you so much.
All the best.
Take care.
See you. Bye.
Wow.
Always
good
to talk to Laurie.
Yeah, it's always enlightening. Yes.
Yeah.
Very much.
For our audience, as an information, these 10 trends on what is happening in SMBs, you find on their blog of the SMB group, which is already available since January. And there are some of the trends we find quite interesting. And so we kept around asking a bit in depth on what is the difference between the larger enterprises, the giants, and the small, let's say, between David and Goliath. What is the real battle, and who is easier in the techniques to survive and to adopt? Like a large super tanker is hard to move and to make, like in the Suez Channel, to be seen, to do a turn or to stay on track. Yeah. And
but very hard to sink.
Yep. And just imagine that container ship would have not only gone partially on ground, but would have sunk. Then we would have a classical blockade technology, which would have some furthermore, let's say, events happening, and will have certain outcomes on our complete economic situation.
Yeah, that's actually a great analogy, because as you say, it is, the super tanker is like a large business. It's very, very hard to maneuver.
Yeah.
It is slow. Once it gets going in a direction, you cannot shift it. If it gets stuck, it may be stuck for a long time. But like I added, it's probably not going to sink because it's built to last for a long time.
Yeah.
Small businesses are exactly the other way around. You can't take a 50-foot yacht and get it stuck in the Suez Canal. It can't be done. It's just too small. So it's very agile. It can adapt to new situations, but it can also be sunk by bumping into the wrong thing. So,
for example, into the shore of the boundaries of the canal. But looking into a maritime example, so there is a type of ship that is similarly big as a supertanker. It's called an aircraft carrier. Those are highly maneuverable. Yeah? So this is probably something where companies could look into what is needed to convert my supertanker into something that can be into an aircraft carrier. So minus the aircraft and minus the belligerent stuff on it.
You need a budget.
The ability to change direction fast.
The aspect is the agility, Thomas, which strikes me positively, such as how do we get into the differentiation again between a speedboat and a supertanker, such as from highly maneuverable, like the yacht Marshall mentioned, to with all its advantages, and do not have the risks in getting sunk by unfriendly weather, high waves, or a storm.
It is tricky. I mean, if we continue this analogy, we're having fun with it. We may as well. The reason the aircraft carrier can do this is because there is a budget behind it that is larger than that of most countries. It costs a lot to build and a lot to maintain, and it is able to perform so well because nobody cares about how much it costs. It has to do the job. So
there we are. It has to do a different job. The optimization formula is different.
Yeah. So in this case, the United States government will just hemorrhage money into its aircraft carrier program to make them the absolute best in the world.
Yeah, but
business cannot necessarily do that.
Why is it? Again, so it's about resilience and survivability. That's the main topics there. A bulk carrier just needs to get from A to B as cheap as possible, which has been the optimization formula of supply chains. Cheap.
Faster is better, but safe
and
is
right. And the other thing needs to survive, right?
The aspect is 10 cruise missiles. Think every starship, every tanker, every aircraft carrier. Now, what's cheaper? 10 cruise missiles properly put into place, or an aircraft carrier? And now rethink the attitude which governments might have or large enterprise might have, because they claim to be unsinkable. But if you are nasty enough and creative enough, you can also harm a large enterprise, not only by a crisis, but what we now see is that large organizations like Facebook honestly do not care about personal privacy data. It's shit to them. 2 years ago, they lost 530 million sets of data. And now the harm is coming in our way, such as the guys which have sold it in the darknet now gave it away for free. Now, I can tell you that my spam filters are running mad.
Mine are not, lucky me. So, but on the other hand, so why did they give it away for free? Because it was worthless, unsellable. If it's unsellable, it doesn't have any value for a potential buyer. Means there are no buyers around, which is an interesting different slant on the same picture, isn't it? Not that I condone what Facebook did there or did not do there.
For me, it was like somebody was, let's say, not too happy, or like the British Queen would say, not amused about that it didn't work in the way he suspected and gave it away for free, because he saw that there is an aspect of distortion and cyber sensibilization, such as an agile, resilient business must be ready to prevent and to secure itself to such attacks. Yeah? And a lot of government institutions are not prepared, as we heard from the German government, which were taken by surprise by some updates from Microsoft, which have taken place not as quickly in information as the harm hit its way. Yeah, so they were honestly the BSE, which is for me an indication of the let's say an agglomeration of non-performing stupidity, such as the people which are not good enough to get a proper salary in cybersecurity, they end up with our official government institution. Yeah, because at the end of the day, we need some nerds, even if the last ones, yeah, or not the smartest ones, but we have some, and they do consultancy on how to do some cybersecurity. And that these guys are surprised suddenly by surprise that 14 days before something has happened and they didn't get aware of it, makes me nervous.
Reminds me of a joke. What do you call the person who graduated last in his class in medical school? Doctor.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I like that one.
Yeah.
And he's probably the most efficient one of them. Anyway, so before we are getting into a rant about stupidity of politicians and public servants,
No. It was only cybersecurity.
Which we can easily extend, which I'd like to avoid. And since our hour is gone, and since my puppy annoys me to death, I think
It's a puppy. It has a small bladder. It still has to grow.
Nah, she's big-headed, like her daddy, like me. Opinionated, yeah. She voiced
Hopefully
her
not
opinion.
as bald.
No, she's a bit shaved right now, as she had a surgery a week ago.
Yeah, but that's the other end.
Yep. And well, the forepaw where she got the anesthesia, yeah, where she got poked with the needle. Anyway, so I'd say thanks heaps to everybody who was around, and see you next time when it is Volker Hildebrand talking about CRM and the history of CRM and why the hell we are where we are.
Good to me.
And hopefully with no snowstorms. Yeah.
Yep. No snowstorms. No, he's in California. Chances for snowstorms are low. Okay,
Earthquakes.
going off.